Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so delighted that you're joining us today, and we're really excited. We have a fantastic show for you today. That's why we want you to subscribe, especially subscribe on the iHeartRadio podcasting app, because we don't want you to miss an exciting episode like today's. Our guest is coming to us from Columbia in Maryland. She is the author of Takedown. Her name is Laura Shovan. Before Laura comes in, we want to let you know that we are looking for a few great schools, or a few great public libraries, or a few great private libraries if there are any out there, or a few great malls, corporations, civic organizations. We're just looking for folks who love reading, who want to celebrate our shared love of reading and learning, to host Reading with Your Kids Live. That's right, Reading with Your Kids Live. It's magical. There's storytelling. There's magic. There's illusions. There's audience participation. There's a celebration of everything we love about reading and family. You can find out more about Reading with Your Kids Live by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com/live. Joining us on the line right now from the beautiful state of Maryland, she is the author of a great new book called Takedown. Please welcome to the show, Laura Shovan. Laura, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. Thank you so much for inviting me to have a conversation today. I'm looking forward to it.
I am looking forward to this, too. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Tell us all about Takedown.
Well, Takedown, it is a story in two voices, a middle grade book, and it is about a girl who comes from a big wrestling family. Both of her older brothers are wrestlers, and she wants to be just like them. She sees wrestling as a way to keep the, I don't want to say attention isn't the right word, but to have a better relationship with her dad. Her parents are divorced, and the dad is really involved in her older brother's sports life. So she wants to be part of that too. And then what happens is she goes to join her older brother's travel team, and the coach tells her he doesn't want any girls on the team. He doesn't feel that she can be strong enough to wrestle at that level with the middle school boys who are elite wrestlers, basically. So she has to go and find another team, and the team that she finds is called the Gladiators. The other voice in the book is a boy named Lev, and Lev is a member of the Gladiators wrestling team, and he is determined that he's going to beat his nemesis this year and make his way to the state wrestling championship. When Mickey, the girl, walks into the wrestling room, he has a moment of thinking, I don't mind if there's a girl wrestler. He kind of sees himself as being feminist or fair-minded, which works until the coach assigns him to be Mickey's training partner, and then it becomes a real problem. So this is a story about their wrestling season and about how they go from being not quite adversaries, but reluctant partners to eventually friends and allies. And I just had a great time with these two characters. I love them so much, and this was a case where I had a book in mind based on my son's experiences as a wrestler when he was in elementary and middle school. And I was working on a scene where he sat down on a bench and this girl wrestler, and he had a chat, and next thing I know, the character of Mickey really made her voice heard and wanted to have a stronger presence in the book, and that's how it became a dual narrative.
Wonderful. For folks out there who aren't familiar with the wrestling culture, and it is a very unique culture, as a mom can attest to, kind of a stinky culture, if you have to be honest. There is this. My son wrestled in high school, and I remember you go. Wrestling is just. If you're not involved in it, you have no idea what it's about. And when there are many teams at a tournament, it's like an all day thing. And a kid can wrestle 3 or 4 times, and and they'll have multiple mats, and in some schools there's 3 or 4 mats in the main gym, and then there's a small gym, and there might be a closet somewhere that can fit another, in some of those smaller rooms, when you have 50 very intense athletes who've been wrestling all day in that small enclosed room without ventilation.
Yeah.
It can get kind of ripe.
It does get very stinky. But I like what you pointed out. So people who aren't in the wrestling culture, but who know how swimming culture or gymnastics work, it's very similar. So, you might arrive at a tournament before the sun comes up, because wrestling is generally a winter sport, and be there until after the sun goes down. And your wrestler, the matches for youth wrestling are 3 minutes long. So they might have 3 or 4 matches on a good day. And yet you're spending all day in that stinky, hot gym with people yelling and cheering. And actually, Jed, that's one of the things my character Lev has some, it's not called this in the book, it's just sort of left open, but he has some sensory integration issues. And he talks about the fact that all of that sensory input of the noise and the heat, and actually the wrestling, can be overwhelming sometimes. And the way he handles it is by sitting up at the top of the bleachers and writing or drawing in his notebook. And that's how he takes care of himself while he's at these tournaments.
Wow, fascinating. It's interesting. I just performed. I was performing in New Hampshire, and there was for a middle school group of kids, and there was a young woman in the very front row, and her class was in first, and she had a little notebook and a pen, and it was seated on her lap. And I typically, as the kids come in, I'll go over and talk to them, say hi, maybe make a joke or whatnot. And I did make a comment about the fact that she had her notebook. I said, "Oh, you're going to do your homework if the show gets boring?" And she said, no. Sometimes I get anxious, and when I do, I draw and I sketch, and that's how I deal with it. And I said, well, that's really cool. I said, hey, if you'd like, I'd love if you get anxious during my show and you draw something. I'd love to see what you create, if you want to show me. And she came up at the end of the show and showed me this really cute little sketch. It wasn't about me, but it was it was really cute. But I was really happy that. I'm really happy that we're at a point now in schools where we're recognizing that kids learn differently and experience things differently, and that some kids need their own way to cope with certain situations, and that's becoming okay.
Isn't it amazing that she was so self-aware that she could say to you, this is why I have this notebook, and this is what I'm going to do, and it's okay.
Yeah.
She reassured you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, not because you're boring. You might be boring, but I'm doing this for another reason. Well, another thing folks might not realize is that right now in the United States and possibly other places in the world, if there is no girls team, if a girl wants to wrestle and there's no girls team, then that girl has the right to be on the boys team.
Absolutely.
And so and they just don't wrestle other girls, they'll wrestle whoever is in their weight class. Exactly. And as Laura and I were talking before the show, at first glance that might be startling. And sometimes, and I'll be honest, my daughter and I would go and root my son on at all of his different matches. And we were really impressed with a lot of the young women that we saw wrestling. We found that they were much better technical wrestlers than most of the guys. You could really they were really chess masters out there, and you could see them thinking through all of their moves, and their technique was amazing. But there were very often times when, if there was a young woman and going up against a wrestler who was seemed a lot stronger than her, there were some times when it would feel uncomfortable watching a young woman be just kind of
squashed.
Yes, thank you. I was looking for the word. I would just being squashed on the mat. Yeah.
Well, Well, oh my gosh, Jed, there are so many layers to this question. First of all, let me say, I'm so glad I'm talking to you today because it's National Signing Day. And I've been doing some work with an organization called Wrestle Like a Girl. The sport of wrestling for women has grown astronomically in the last few years. Like, my son stopped wrestling maybe 10 years ago, and I'm just amazed at how the sport has grown for women, and Wrestle Like a Girl is in support of that. And they have an initiative that they're talking about actually today called Wrestle the Gap, because there is only one Division I NCAA team for women's wrestling right now. So women who want to wrestle in college are forced to wrestle the guys, first of all. Some of them choose to, but it's until we have more teams for women's wrestling, that's who they're going to wrestle. They're going to wrestle the guys. So there's a lot to say about it. I think, people can be squeamish because when we see a boy and a girl, especially teenagers, touching each other, we tend to think in our heads that it's a sexual situation. And as you and I talked about earlier, I've talked to many adults and teens who wrestle. And when girls are in the wrestling room with the guys, they come to respect each other as athletes. They're not thinking about the situation as a gender situation. However, there is a history of boys, not so much, I guess, anymore. I haven't heard about it in a while, but there was a time when boys would, if they were at a tournament and they were up against a girl, some of them would choose to forfeit rather than wrestle the girl. I mean, there are some guys who are taught you don't hurt girls and women, and that's a very deep cultural belief. So the first woman to win Olympic gold from the United States in women's wrestling, Helen Maroulis, she talks about this. This happened to her, and if I'm remembering correctly, until her coach told other teams, if you forfeit against Helen, we're going to pull our team completely. Like, we won't wrestle you if you refuse to wrestle the girl on our team. Until that happened, there were guys who were forfeiting rather than wrestle her. So one thing that happened to me in researching this book, because I'm in Maryland, where Helen Maroulis is from, and another Olympic athlete named Kyle Snyder is also a Marylander, I got to go to a clinic and observe them working with kids. And lo and behold, even though there is a women's wrestling team in the United States, the guys and the girls on the Olympic level train together. So it was no big deal to see Helen Maroulis and Kyle Snyder showing the kids some moves against each other. It's another part of wrestling culture, and I'm really glad to see boys and girls wrestling together. I met recently with the founder of Wrestle Like a Girl, and she said something so interesting. She was saying that the female wrestlers are teaching girls and boys what it means to be strong, what it means to be a strong woman. And having that girl in the wrestling room, I think it really benefits everybody on the team.
Yeah, and one of the things that I loved about wrestling and wrestling culture is that one of the things that you learn is that, there's strength involved, but wrestling there's a real strong mental aspect to it too.
Yeah, it's a sport very much about discipline. Wrestlers they're going to lose matches. So there's actually, I have a scene in the book where Lev talks about this. I have seen kids. You'll see kids when they lose a match and it's a tough match. You'll see these big, strong kids out in the hallway with the T-shirt pulled over their heads, crying, or in the car with the music on because they need to step away, or in the bathroom crying. Emotionally, it's a very hard sport. Hard on parents too, which I'm sure you know. But it teaches them that they have to brush it off and get back on the mat and be ready to wrestle the next match and kind of get out of their heads the match that they lost. So there's a lot of mental discipline, and I think that that's an important piece. And I think in talking to Sally Roberts from Wrestle Like a Girl, she said something really interesting to me. She said that wrestling provides a really important structure for a lot of kids, and that was certainly the case for my son. And so in her case, she came from a very disadvantaged background, and between being in the military and becoming, that was later as an adult, but becoming a wrestler when she was in school age, it really saved her life. It provided the structure that was missing from her life, and that was something she really needed. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in the book, Mickey, the girl character, is the one who really needs that structure. Wrestling is so embedded in her family, and she wants to plug into that, even though her family's a little bit unsure about whether they want her to wrestle at this competitive level where she's going to be one of the only girls.
Mm-hmm. And you're right about so many different things. Wrestling it does provide that discipline, and it's a team sport, and there's that great team, training together and that support and whatnot. But when you're out on the mat, you're by yourself. So it's very unique in sports, I think, in that it's both there's that very, very strong team aspect, but there's mm-hmm. also that individual. When you're out there, you are out there on your own.
Definitely, and I think that's something I tried to show in the book is one of the things that, in particular, Lev really enjoys is being on this team that spans all the way from kindergartners up through 8th graders. One of his best friends on the team has a little brother, and there are just some scenes in the book taken from our lives as a wrestling family where the kids are just like tumbling around, piling on each other, before their practices, and just roughhousing in a way that they really enjoy doing as all ages. And my family loved that about the sport. My son loved that about the sport because he could be a mentor and a big brother to the little kids, but there was always that 8th grader, that big kid who he had a special relationship with and who he looked up to. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember my son's high school team. My daughter and my daughter was a dancer, and dance competition culture is very much like that wrestling tournament culture. You're all there all day long for 2 minutes on stage or 2 minutes on the mat. And my son's wrestling team would come out, and they would come out, and there would be music playing, and they had this little routine. And it wasn't quite a dance, but there was choreography and movement together, which normally qualifies as dance. So we would just kind of rib my son about, that was a nice dance when you came out. It's like, no, it's not. It's tradition. But, one of the questions I often ask authors is, what kind of conversations do you think a parent and child could have as they're reading Takedown? Now, I don't see that a mini family snuggling up on the couch to read Takedown aloud, although that's really beneficial to read aloud to your middle school kids.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. But if a family was co-reading this, what kind of conversations do you think families could have?
Well, so many. I think that I'll just break it down by character. One of the conversations around the character of Lev has to do with he is a boy who has identified so strongly with this sport for so many years. Mm-hmm. And in the course of the story of the book, he hits a kind of an emotional wall. Something happens, and he starts to question whether this sport is a good fit for him. So that idea of, for middle schoolers in particular, who associate themselves so strongly with usually an activity or something that they feel good at, and starting to ask them who they are beyond that. Who am I outside of that one thing that I'm good at? Because they're going to need to rely on that later in life, and that's definitely part of what happens with Lev. For Mickey, I think a big part of it is she comes from a family where the eldest brother is kind of like the golden child of the family. He's a former state champion wrestler. He's the eldest. He has a very special relationship with the father in the book. And the parents kind of coddle him. And at one point in the story, Mickey is able to say, especially to her mother, the way you treat him is impacting our family, and you need to start calling him out on his behavior. Like, boys will be boys, doesn't cut it, Mom. And I think that could be a really important conversation to have as well. But I think the overarching theme for me would be the idea that when you have this space that's very male, and the wrestling room can be a very male space, it takes one boy to say to the other boys, we're going to include this girl, which is what happens in the story. Love is the one who finally says, we need to start treating this girl as a teammate and not as somebody separate from us. And just that idea in any space that tends to be male-dominated, that boys who invite, or coaches or men who invite the girl to be part of the circle, that's really important. And how do boys go about doing that without being pushed out themselves? Which I think is important to talk about also, because I think there's some fear around that. You know, if I include this girl or this outsider, if we take it away from gender, if I include this outsider in our circle, am I going to get pushed out myself? So I think those would be the three main things that I think families might talk about with this book.
And you hit on two that are really important for me, and that one about, you know, and it's something I address in my my educational magic shows, is that whole idea of being a hero. And being a hero doesn't just mean rushing in to save someone from a fire.
Exactly.
It can mean standing up and saying to the new kid at the school, I want to be your friend. You know, going up to that person who is identified as different and opening up your arms and offering to be a friend.
Right.
Yeah.
And saying to that person, not just I'm going to be your friend, but I'm going to invite you in to sort of the larger whatever it is. You know, I'm going to invite you to my lunch table and introduce you to my other friends. I'm going to show them that it's okay.
Right. And that does take an incredible amount of courage. And this is a wonderful way for us to encourage our kids to do that and to find that courage.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, what you pointed out too, is, you know, there's that piece of not jumping in and saying, I'm going to save this person and I'm going to be the hero. And Lev acknowledges that. There's a point where he says, you know, Mickey might not want me to be her savior, but I'm going to at least talk to her about it.
You know, the other thing that you touch on, and we touched on in terms of what kind of conversations we can have, is that whole idea of kids, especially in the last 20 years or so, kids are specializing in different areas at a very, very young age. Yes. And they're being identified. I mean, my daughter was somebody who, at age 5, was, you know, won some kind of national dance championship, and was immediately kind of like, yes, this is you, and now you're going to compete next year at an international level, and you're going to be dancing 18, 19, 20 hours. You know, my wife and I, we just said, no.
Right.
But one of the things that my daughter kind of understood is all through wherever she danced, she was always the top dancer at this studio and moved to another one, and she's the top dancer at that studio. And so people would say, "Whoa, you're going to be a dancer. You're so talented." And she would have conversations with me and say, "Yeah, I'm the top dancer at my studio, but there's probably 10,000 studios around the country, and there's a top dancer at every one of those studios. So I don't know where I fit into those top 10. And no, I'm not. I like dance. It's fun, and I do well at it, but it's not me. It doesn't define me."
Right,
and
exactly.
She had a healthy attitude about it, but there are so many other kids who don't have that same kind of attitude. When you take dance, when you take wrestling, baseball, hockey away from them, then they're like, who am I?
Right. Yeah, I think it's part of recognizing how complex children are, that they're full human beings with lots of different interests. You're reminding me, I used to tutor kids who were writing their college essays, and I had a student I was tutoring who was a concert pianist, and he wanted to write about the fact that he loved computers and built his own computer. But he was known for being this amazing concert pianist, but that wasn't what he wanted to write about. He wanted to explore this other side of him that wasn't how people, if we were just putting him if we were just putting a tag on him and saying what he did, like what was he best at, it would have been piano, but that's not what he wanted to write about. That's not what he wanted to say about himself. So, definitely in this book, Lev in particular is the character who's thinking about those things and saying, who am I outside of the sport, and what's really important to me.
Yeah, that's such an important conversation for us to have with our kids. I think for parents, it's a really important conversation for kids to have with our parents, because I think a lot of times parents, especially when they're looking ahead and they're thinking, oh my goodness, college is $70,000-$80,000 a year. How am I going to afford that? He's going to get a scholarship. She's going to get a scholarship. And so they start to identify their kids as a wrestler, as a soccer player, as a dancer. And so maybe it's an important conversation for kids to have with their parents, so that they can help their parents understand, I'm a little bit more than just a dancer or wrestler.
Yeah. The other thing, too, that I think was really important, and this was based on our family's own life, is the character of Lev has an older sister who is a very, very driven field hockey player, and does plan on or hope to get a college scholarship. She's kind of about that age. She's more like a junior in high school, whereas he's in middle school. And at one point he has a conversation with his father where the father acknowledges, because your sister can thrive on this, she can do sports all week and still drive herself to get good grades. Drive herself, not in the car, but she's driven to get good grades and she always has to push herself and be the best. Well, we assumed that you were the same way. And there's a moment where Lev and his father start to talk about, I'm not like my sister. I'm not driven in the same way she is, and there are parts of our family life that I'm missing because we've been so focused on sports. And although for my sister, that was fine. She's happy to miss Thanksgiving because there's a field hockey tournament down at Disney on Thanksgiving weekend. That's not me. I want that family time. So I think that was an important conversation too, and one that we had in our family about how our children can have different needs from each other, and sometimes as parents we get we think, we've got this one kid who's doing things this way, so, that worked, so we're just going to keep doing that. No, it doesn't always work.
Right. So many conversations that can come from a fun, entertaining read that some people would, it's a middle grade book. How important can that be? Well, the time that you spend with the kids, and if a book, one of the things I love about books is it's a catalyst, and it just can lead to so many different conversations, such wonderful times, such moments of growth and insight, just for both the parent and the child, and for both of them together to help them understand each other.
Definitely. I don't remember reading with my parents beyond, when I was first learning to read when I was a young kid. And I really enjoy and enjoyed sharing books with my kids, like you said, as they got older, just kind of reading alongside and passing books back and forth with our children and talking about them. It's, it lets you as a parent have insight into your kids and what they're thinking and what they're interested in. So I love it. Yeah, it is. It allows for, I think, a deeper conversation.
because there's so many, when you're sitting down, you're talking about characters in a book. The kids aren't, they're not talking about themselves necessarily, but they share a lot about themselves.
Yes.
And they share a lot more than they would if you were sitting down and directly, kind of, what do you feel about this? And it's like, leave me alone.
You're reminding me of Emily Dickinson, tell the truth, but tell it slant, so we can get at some truth about our kids by not going directly head on when we ask them questions. We can ask them questions about a book that we're reading together and get at the truth that way.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, this is not the first book that Laura Shovan has written. She's written another book, but I'm not even going to mention that because I am going to invite Laura to come back to talk about that book at another time because I've had so much fun talking about Takedown. But I do, Laura, I want you to tell folks where they can find out more about you online because you have a great website.
Oh yeah, so I'm the only person in the United States with the name Laura Shovan. So my website is under that name. My Twitter account, my Instagram, my Facebook account are all under my name. If you type in that name, you will find me. And I should say quickly that I'm a poet in the school, so most Fridays I blog something poetry related at my website. And if you're interested in poetry and arts education, you can follow along at my website. And I'd love to see you over there.
That's awesome. So it's laurashovan.com. There's no W in Shovan. That's what I'd be typing. I'd be going crazy. Well, where is she? She said she was here. Let me .co and .nl and all that other kind of stuff. But we've been talking today about her latest book. It's called Takedown. Are there any stories about ringworm? That's one of the memories my wife has.
Gosh. That's so funny that you asked that. I think my son did have it at some point. There is a scene where they do a skin check, but no, there's no ringworm. Oh my gosh, those mats. Oh, disgusting.
Yes. My wife, I don't know what she was more grossed out about. She would literally go to the wrestling matches and sit in those uncomfortable high school bleachers with her back to the wrestling mat. And I'd go, how are you doing that? How are you staying upright? She said, no, I'm not looking. And then, there'd be something and that was, wrestling culture is fascinating and unique and wonderful. And if your kids are interested in it, go to a match, support them. It's really fun. Stinky, but really We've been talking today about Takedown. Our guest has been Laura Shovan. Laura, thank you so much for being on the show.
Jed, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Dr. Dawn Mensch. She'll be here. We hope you will be here too. Hey, I want to thank Laura Shovan for joining us today. Check out her great book, Takedown. We also want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio Podcast. Thank you so much for subscribing to the show on iHeartRadio or wherever you find your podcast. And, of course, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.